There are moments when the world seems to tilt, not suddenly, but with the slow grace of something inevitable. The sound of breaking glass, the trembling earth beneath ambition, the shattering of everything believed permanent. Once, there was a man who shaped dreams into towers, carving his certainty into the sky. Yet on a single morning, his creation surrendered to gravity, folding in upon itself like a forgotten prayer. Silence followed, not the kind that comforts, but the kind that reveals. Faces blurred behind smoke, papers scattered like broken wings. In the wreckage, he felt the weight of every decision echo through his chest. He ran, not away but inward, toward the only horizon left unbroken, the one within. The city lights faded behind him, swallowed by mountains whispering of another kind of structure, one not built by hands but by understanding. There, among clouds and cold breath, he would come to learn the architecture of letting go. The mountains were not welcoming. They stood like old teachers, unmoved by his exhaustion. Each breath of cold air felt like a question, each step a confession. There were no words here, no mirrors of validation, only the echo of one's own heart. In the valley below, life glittered in movement and noise. Yet up here, the world narrowed to the rhythm of feet and breath. Hunger burned away his self-pity. Silence stripped him bare. He began to see that failure was not a moment but a weight carried long before collapse. The tower that fell had only mirrored the cracks already inside. When he stumbled upon the temple gates, the wooden beams seemed older than thought itself, carved by hands that understood impermanence. He did not knock. He simply stood, waiting for something to end, unaware that something far greater was beginning. He slept for the first time in days upon cold stone beneath a roof that was not his. In dreams, the tower fell again, over and over, until he stopped trying to hold it upright. When morning came, the scent of pine and incense wove through the air. An old monk moved silently across the courtyard, sweeping without looking up. The simplicity of the motion disarmed him. No lectures, no judgment, only the whisper of bristles and leaves. When the monk finally glanced his way, there was no recognition, no surprise, as if he had always been expected. The stillness pressed against his chest like truth. Without words, the old man gestured toward a bucket and broom. And just like that, the architect began to sweep his own ruins clean. Days blended into silence. The sound of sweeping, of wind, of footsteps across gravel became his only language. His mind rebelled, demanding answers, demanding meaning. But none came. The more he tried to meditate, the louder his thoughts became. He remembered boardrooms, applause, blueprints, the illusion of being someone who mattered. Now he was only breath and motion. Yet in this reduction, something subtle began to shift. The silence no longer accused him. It held him. And in that holding he felt both the sting and the mercy of truth, that he had built not towers, but cages. And now, finally, he was free enough to feel the emptiness they had hidden that evening. He followed the faint sound of water and found her, a woman by the river's edge, drawing colors into sand with deliberate grace. Each pattern shimmered under the fading light. Then she erased it with a single sweep of her hand. He watched in confusion. Why destroy something so beautiful? She smiled without looking up, as if she could feel his question in the wind. The river carried the colored sand away, scattering it into the current, each grain glinting like a fragment of memory released. For the first time in years, he felt something soften. The world no longer demanded meaning. It only asked to be witnessed. And in that moment, as the last trace of color dissolved downstream, failure lost its name. Morning rose like a soft command, quiet, deliberate, and unrelenting. The air at the temple carried the scent of wet cedar and burning incense. He woke to the sound of sweeping again, the same rhythm that had greeted him since his arrival. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed to respect the discipline of silence here. The days unfolded not in hours, but in repetitions. Sweeping, bowing, breathing, serving tea. Each motion was precise, purposeful, unhurried. Yet inside, storms still raged. The world below, the city of glass and noise, haunted him. He wondered if he had escaped failure or only delayed its memory. The old monk passed him without a word, his presence both question and answer. The silence pressed closer, like a mirror he could no longer avoid. He tried to meditate, but his thoughts chased each other like restless birds. Memories of the collapse came in flashes. The roar, the smoke, the faces. Each time he tried to still them, they grew louder. Around him, others sat unmoving, their breaths deep and even. He envied their peace. The old monk would sometimes glance his way and smile, as though the chaos inside him were not a burden, but a lesson unfolding. Hours passed like entire seasons. In that stillness, time dissolved, leaving only the raw pulse of awareness. His knees ached, his mind burned, and yet, in brief fragments, something deeper began to whisper. Between two breaths, he felt space widen. It was fleeting, fragile, but real. The silence was no longer empty. It was alive. One morning, the old monk spoke for the first time. His voice was low, weathered by years of wind and laughter. When a tree falls, he said, does it fail the forest or return to it? The question lingered like mist, clinging to the mind long after sound had faded. He didn't answer. He couldn't. For days, the words gnawed at him, not for their mystery, but for the mirror they held up. In his world, everything had been measured by outcome. Success or failure, rise or fall. But here, the boundaries blurred. Maybe falling was not failure at all. Maybe it was simply transformation. He began to notice how each leaf surrendered to decay, how the river carried fallen petals without resistance. For the first time, he didn't need to rebuild what had been lost. He only needed to see it. As days turned to weeks, something inside him softened. His movements grew slower, deliberate, shaped by attention rather than urgency. The act of sweeping became prayer. Washing dishes became meditation. He began to notice details. The warmth of water on his skin, the echo of birdsong between stones, the scent of smoke after rain. There was peace here, but also a quiet unease, as if silence itself were testing him. One evening, he found himself staring into a pond, watching ripples spread from a single falling leaf. His reflection trembled, then vanished. In that moment, he realized the man he once was no longer existed. The world would not mourn him, and that strangely was liberation. On the 40th morning, he was told to gather water from the mountain spring. The path was steep, the air thin, but something in him welcomed the strain. When he reached the source, he found a woman crouched by the stream, pouring colored sand into the water. She looked up briefly and smiled, the same calm presence he had seen by the river once before. Her silence spoke more than comfort could. The sand swirled and vanished downstream, each grain a quiet offering to impermanence. When he filled his bucket, she whispered only one thing. The river does not keep what it carries. As he walked back, her words rippled through his heart. He began to understand that peace was not built, but found in motion, in loss, in the letting go. The days began to breathe differently. Each morning, a low mist draped the valley like unspoken thought. He found himself drawn to the river, where the woman created her sand mandalas, only to erase them again. Her rhythm became a riddle he could not solve. Why craft beauty meant to vanish? Each stroke of her hand seemed both prayer and farewell. He watched her smile as the wind undid her work, and it stirred something sharp within him. Anger, grief, awe. He had once built to last forever. She built to disappear. Yet in her erasure, he sensed freedom. There was no defeat in her destruction, only grace. The mandalas existed not to be kept, but to be lived, like moments, like breath. Standing there, he began to suspect that perhaps the truest creations were those that knew how to die. He began helping her. At first clumsily, spilling sand, smudging lines, she only laughed. A sound gentle as wind through reeds. Together, they created mandalas that glowed under morning sun, only to brush them away by dusk. In that act, he learned patience, humility, and the strange ache of detachment. The destruction no longer felt cruel, it felt complete. As he poured each line of color, he felt the weight of his past dissolve grain by grain. One evening, when the final design shimmered gold before the setting sun, she whispered, "Everything is borrowed, even joy." He felt the truth of it deep in his chest. It was not sorrow that filled him, but peace, fragile, luminous, fleeting. And he let it go. One night, heavy winds swept through the valley. By morning, the riverbank was bare, every trace of their work erased. He stared at the empty ground, an ache blooming quietly inside him. But Ayako only smiled. "The wind remembers," she said softly. "It carries what we've made to places we'll never see." He watched the river flow, endless and unbothered, and for the first time he didn't feel loss, only movement. Life, he realized, never keeps still long enough to belong to anyone. The structures he once designed were born of fear vanishing. Yet here in this blank canvas of sand and silence, he found what permanence could never hold, peace without possession. He began to see impermanence everywhere. In the falling petals that adorned the temple path, in the fading laughter of the monks at dusk, in his own reflection that changed with each breath. Master Haku said little, but his silence deepened as Ryo's questions faded. The need to understand was losing its edge. Instead, he began to live each gesture as if it were both beginning and end, bowing, sweeping, smiling, breathing. In the quiet rhythm of daily life, failure seemed almost absurd. How could anything fail when everything was always in motion, always transforming? The river didn't mourn the rain. The flame didn't fear its smoke. In each passing moment, he began to sense eternity, not in duration, but in presence. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, Master Haku approached him by the river. Without preamble, the old monk said, "To build, you must learn to let the wind draw your lines." Then he turned and walked away, his laughter echoing like distant thunder. The words struck deeper than any lesson. To build, not from control, but surrender. That night, Ryo stood by the flowing water, his hands open, feeling the cool wind move between his fingers. He no longer sought redemption, nor feared collapse. In the space where ambition once ruled, something softer emerged. Acceptance. And in that quiet he knew, to let go was not to lose, but to finally create without fear. The storm came without warning. Wind roared through the valley, tearing prayer flags from their ropes and hurling rain against the temple's ancient beams. The monks moved swiftly, securing doors and carrying lamps, but the storm's strength was merciless. He ran to help, heart pounding, trying to hold together what could not be held. A section of the outer wall gave way with a deep, trembling groan. As stone and wood collapsed into mud, something inside him broke open. It was the same sound heard years ago, the moment his city tower fell. Yet, this time, the destruction felt different. The mountain did not mourn. It simply yielded, then stilled. He stood drenched in the ruin, shaking, realizing that he had been here before, not in place, but in self. The collapse was not returning to him. He was returning to it to face what he had fled. When dawn came, the valley was drenched in silence. The temple lay wounded, roofs caved, walls split, sacred scrolls scattered like fallen leaves. He worked feverishly, repairing, lifting, rebuilding. The ache in his hands reminded him of the life he had left behind, the life that had devoured him. By noon, Master Haku approached, his shadow falling over the broken beams. "Why do you rush?" the old monk asked softly. "Because it is broken," he replied. Haku smiled faintly. "Then who is broken, the wall, or the one who cannot bear to see it so?" The question struck like thunder. He froze, tools slipping from his hands. For a long moment he stood still, feeling the echo of those words resound through every breath. The storm had not destroyed the temple, only revealed what needed to fall. He stopped repairing. Instead, he sat among the ruins, breathing. Around him, monks moved quietly, rebuilding with patience. He realized he had been trying to erase imperfection, to restore what once was. But now he saw. Nothing needed to return to what it had been. The broken beams told a new story, one that included the fall. He brushed his hand over a cracked pillar and felt no urge to fix it, only to understand it. In that stillness, the line between creation and collapse vanished. The world was not divided into success and failure, only into what exists and what changes. He thought of Aiko's mandalas, of the river carrying color downstream, of his tower's collapse. Everything was the same lesson, whispered in different tongues. There is no ruin, only return. As evening settled, the old monk approached him again. He carried no tools, only a single small mirror wrapped in cloth. Placing it before him, he said, "Look carefully. Not at your face, but at what looks through it." The words rippled through the air like a stone dropped into still water. He gazed into the mirror. For a moment he saw the familiar: fatigue, loss, guilt. Then, as his breath slowed, the reflection seemed to dissolve into light and shadow. He saw his own eyes staring back, but they were vast, empty, calm, like the mountain itself. He realized he had been building towers to contain this endlessness, to give shape to what could not be shaped. Tears came without sorrow, just release. The mirror trembled in his hands, and for the first time, he smiled. That night, the sky cleared completely. Stars burned above the temple like embers scattered by unseen hands. The sound of wind through the broken rafters was softer now, a lullaby instead of a warning. He felt no urge to repair, no urge to flee. The temple, the ruins, the storm, his own past, all were threads of the same cloth. He finally understood. The structure he had tried to perfect had always been perfect, even in collapse. The old monk passed by once more, glancing at him with quiet amusement. "Now you see," he murmured. "The mirror never broke. Only your fear of it did." The words faded into the stars, and in their silence he bowed, not to a teacher, but to life itself. The morning after the storm was impossibly still. Smoke rose from small fires the monks had built to dry what the rain had soaked. He sat by one, staring into the embers. The flames wavered, their dance both violent and tender. Each spark reminded him of something that had once burned in him: ambition, pride, fear. The fire consumed everything without hesitation, yet what remained was not loss, but warmth. He realized he had spent years running from this very purification. Failure, suffering, silence, all were fires meant not to punish, but to cleanse. The old monk approached, setting a bowl of tea beside him, and said nothing. The two sat together as wind carried ashes into the morning sky. Watching them drift, he felt the old self within him begin to dissolve, smoke rising into something vast, unnamed, and free. In meditation, the quiet became unbearable. The mind no longer showed images of the tower or the storm, only emptiness. But within that emptiness, something began to tremble. Memories he had buried resurfaced. The sound of laughter before the collapse, the faces of those who trusted him, the pride he mistook for purpose. Each image rose and vanished, yet left behind the ache of recognition. He tried to push them away, but the silence held him fast. Then, like the first drop before rain, a tear slid down his cheek. Not sorrow, clarity. He saw that his suffering had always been self-made, crafted from the refusal to forgive himself. In that instant, something gave way. The fire he had feared now burned within, fierce but kind, illuminating the very place he had once called failure. That evening, Master Haku found him tending the fire once again. Without prelude, the monk spoke a single question. Who fails when there is no one to succeed? The words struck like a bell, ringing inside his chest. He looked up, meeting the old man's calm gaze, and something in him broke open. The question dissolved the last of his resistance, leaving only stillness. For years, he had lived as if the world were a stage. Success and failure, applause and ruin. But beneath it all, there had never been an actor, only the play itself unfolding. Laughter welled up from somewhere deep and wild, echoing through the courtyard. The monk laughed too, a sound like wind brushing through bamboo, and in their laughter, the fire flared high, as if the world itself joined in joy at the unveiling of truth. The days that followed felt weightless, the boundaries between doing and being dissolved. He no longer swept to cleanse, nor built to repair. He moved as wind moves, simply because it must. When the other monks looked at him, they saw a quiet glow in his eyes, a peace that could not be spoken. Even Eiko noticed it when she returned to the temple, carrying her bowls of colored sand. They sat together in silence by the river. For the first time, he joined her in erasing the mandala before it was complete. Their hands brushed the colors away, and in that act, he felt profound unity. Not with her, not with the world, but with the flow that carried both. There was no desire to keep, no fear of loss. The fire within had become light. On the final evening of summer, the temple gathered for meditation under the stars. The air shimmered with stillness. Master Haku stood before them and said, "When you see the fire in the dark, do not run. It is your own light returning." The words sank deep into the hush. As the monks closed their eyes, he felt warmth spreading from within, neither beginning nor ending. He understood now. Failure had been a gate, not a grave. It had burned away the illusions that once chained him to identity. In the silence, breath and night became one. When he opened his eyes, the stars above seemed closer, as if bowing in acknowledgement. He smiled, not at triumph, but at the simple truth. Once the fire is within, nothing outside can destroy you. When the first autumn mist rose from the valley, he knew it was time to descend. The mountain had given him silence, but silence was never meant to be kept. It was meant to be carried into the noise of the world. Master Haku gave no farewell, only a nod that felt like both blessing and release. He walked down the same path he had once climbed in shame, but the steps felt lighter now, as if gravity had loosened its hold. The city shimmered in the distance, the same towers, the same hum of ambition, yet something within him had shifted beyond recognition. He was not returning as the man who had left. He was returning as space itself, one who had learned to build from emptiness. The mountain wind followed him down, whispering, "Now, build with peace, not pride." The city greeted him with its old hunger. Lights buzzing, people rushing, dreams colliding like waves. Yet what once overwhelmed him now appeared beautiful in its chaos. He wandered through crowded streets without destination, observing faces lined with longing and exhaustion. In each stranger he saw a reflection of who he had been, chasing permanence in a world that never stopped moving. Passing an empty lot where his tower once stood, he paused. Grass had grown over the ruins. For a moment he bowed, not in grief, but in gratitude. What had fallen had cleared space for what was yet to come. He realized now that creation was not about endurance, but renewal. The city's noise became a song, and every heartbeat in it a reminder that nothing was ever truly lost. He began to build again, not towers of glass and ego, but shelters of kindness. In a forgotten part of the city, he found a group of workers rebuilding homes for those who had none. He joined them quietly, asking for no title, no recognition. His hands, once obsessed with precision, now moved with compassion. Each beam he raised felt lighter than air, as though forgiveness itself was lifting the weight. The others laughed, sang, and worked with a joy he had never known in his old world. One evening, as the sun set behind unfinished walls, he stood watching the light pass through gaps in the structure. Temporary, fragile, perfect. For the first time, he saw beauty not in completion, but in becoming. One afternoon, as he rested beneath a half-built roof, Aiko appeared. She carried a small pouch of colored sand and a smile untouched by time. Without words, she knelt beside the new foundation and began to draw. He joined her. Together they created a mandala on the concrete floor, circles within circles, patterns within impermanence. When the wind came, they didn't stop it. The sand lifted, scattering into beams of sunlight. Around them, workers paused to watch, their chatter fading into awe. The moment passed quickly, like breath. But something in that silence lingered. A reminder that every act of creation was also an act of release. Aiko looked at him and said softly, "Now you build what even wind can bless." He nodded, and the wind carried their laughter away. Years passed quietly. The shelters grew into a small community. Simple homes, open courtyards, gardens where children played. He became known not as a great architect, but as the quiet builder who listened more than he spoke. People often came to him with plans and expectations, yet he would always smile and say, "Let the structure tell us what it wants to be." One evening, as the sky bled into indigo, he stood among the roofs he had helped raise. Laughter echoed, smoke rose, and peace settled over the neighborhood like dusk itself. He realized he had never truly stopped building, only learned to build differently. With each breath, with each act of compassion, he shaped something invisible yet enduring. He no longer sought to leave a mark. He had become one with the earth that held them all. They asked him to speak, to explain how to avoid the pitfalls that swallow bright beginnings. He stood before the expectant faces and felt no need to persuade. The room breathed with the quiet promise of blank pages. He began with a story that had no hero, only a path, a fall, a mountain, a fire, a river that kept nothing. The lesson was disarmingly simple. Hold the broom before the blueprint. Learn to erase before you draw. He told them success is a mask and failure its twin, and both slip in rain. Build from what listens, not from what shouts. Let every line you draft know it will one day be wind. A hand rose to ask for guarantees. He offered presence instead. "You will never fail again," he said. "When you stop demanding that life validate your plans." The room fell into a silence that felt like dawn breaking inside the chest. By the river, the pattern returned like breath. She drew circles within circles, colors meeting and parting like tides, and he watched the old riddle bloom. When she paused, he knelt and pressed his palm into the center, smearing gold into dusk. No protest came, only a smile widening like water. Together they erased the careful hours, grain by bright grain, until the design became current, the current became distance, and distance became sky. He felt no ache, only the warmth of something understood at last. Creation is the courage to release what you love into what you cannot control. The wind slid along the surface and carried the last flecks away. In that vanishing, a fullness rose that words could not hold. He bowed to the emptied earth and the earth bowed back with the hush of running water. Nights in the new quarter glowed with cooking fires and unguarded laughter. He walked among the unfinished walls and felt the comfort of spaces that breathe. A crack in one beam worried the others. He traced it with a fingertip and said, "Let it speak." Through that slender fault, a square of sky appeared when the moon climbed high, and the room learned a new way to receive light. Plans shifted to welcome shadows. Courtyards angled to invite wind. He saw how listening revised every drawing, how humility turned structures into hosts. People gathered beneath the gaps and told stories, rain chiming on tin, silence stitching their words together. He realized the work was not the buildings, but the hearts that softened within them. The measure of a home was not its lines, but the ease with which it could be forgiven. He returned to the mountain with the first frost. The temple wore its scars openly, and the wind read sutras through the broken rafters. The old teacher waited at the gate, smiling as if the seasons themselves had sent him. No ceremony, only two figures sharing the same breath and cold air. "What did you build?" came the question that was also a blessing. "Rooms that welcomed their own emptiness," he answered, and laughter rose, light and unafraid. A bell sounded somewhere below the fog, and with it a clarity that felt like snow. There was nothing left to prove, no verdict to escape. The gaze that met his was a mirror without edges. "Then keep sweeping," the voice said. "Even when the floor is clean." They walked to the old stones without speaking, and each step dissolved the distance between teacher and sky. On a ridge above city and river, dawn unspooled like silk. He closed his eyes and listened. Distant markets waking, a bell remembered, water repeating its ancient sentence. The promise he once chased had vanished, replaced by the steadier grace of meeting, each moment as if it were the last and the first. He thought of falls and fires, of patterns made to disappear, of rooms that let the moon in through their flaws. The words formed without effort, not as a boast, but as a bow. "You will never fail again. Not because you will always rise, but because you will stop dividing the rising from the falling." He drew a small circle in the frost and swept it away with his sleeve. The horizon widened. Wind passed through him as through a doorway left open on purpose.